Good morning, everybody. My name is Joshua Carpenter of Carpenter and Associates, and I just wanted to take a couple minutes here to introduce myself and talk about something, kind of an intro of some of the other things that are going to be coming out soon. It's pretty near and dear to my heart. I'm going to give you a brief background of me and why it's important to me. I started my legal career way too long ago, way back in the 90s, as a matter of fact, as a police officer. And I started as an officer in West Valley City, Utah, while I was going to school full time. And that's where kind of a lot of this passion started. To give a little bit of a background, I was a police officer, went to law school, opened my own firm, ended up studying some more and got a PhD in developmental psychology. I now assist people in domestic violence situations, but I've also been testifying and been hired as an expert in actually 5 different states at this point with multiple jurisdictions. And what I do is I help people in the psychological effects of domestic violence in custody and divorce cases, as well as prosecution of domestic violence offenders and the effects that it has on children. And so it sounds pretty ugly, and oftentimes it really is ugly, but it's part of the world that a lot of people don't like to think about, don't like to deal with, and it falls on the shoulders of others to make sure that as close to what we have as justice prevails. And so I wanted to talk about something really quickly, if I can get my computer to deal with me here. I wanted to talk about something just very briefly called the cycle of abuse. And first and foremost, domestic violence in general, I'm not a good script reader or anything else. And so typically whenever I'm in court as a trial attorney and everything else, or even when I teach seminars or whatever, I just talk without a script. And so if that drives you crazy, I apologize in advance. I have notes and I have a script, but I probably won't stick to it too much. But anyway, I just want to read a couple things real quick. And it says, as I wrote up, it says, domestic violence obviously is not simply an argument that gets out of hand. It's a pattern of behavior. It's deliberate, repeated, and typically it's a downward spiral. An escalation of force, some would say, used by one person to gain and maintain power and control over another. It occurs within marriages, dating relationships. It occurs within families, households. It doesn't really discriminate between income, sex, culture, or otherwise, or even gender. And most often, almost all the time, I would say, domestic violence is about control. It's about one person controlling the other. In my humble opinion, it's one of the worst things that you can do to somebody emotionally. Physically, obviously, it's tough too. But as you go through a domestic violence scenario, one person is essentially removing the liberty or the other person's ability to live a free life. And that's a horrifying thing to get into psychologically and physically and everything else. And so at its core, domestic violence thrives in secrecy, fear, manipulation. Victims describe feeling like the world becomes smaller over time. And the reason for that is they typically get put on an island. They're taken out of their family support groups, social support groups. They're taken out off of everything, and they become completely dependent on the abuser. They're put on an island, so to speak, and they depend on that abuser for everything, financially, socially, and very oftentimes even mentally and psychologically. They feel like they cannot exist without that person. Now, I'm going to tell a story real quick from my police officer days. It's probably going to sound a little silly, but it really wasn't that silly at the time. But it was one of my first introductions into the power of domestic violence relationship. And so as a young police officer, we showed up at a house and we got there. The husband answered the door. Clearly a fight had happened. There were a lot of broken things in the house. And the wife was sitting in a chair in the living room. And the layout of this house, just so you understand, is you walk into the house, and to the immediate left, there was an apartment. The immediate left was a family room. And to the immediate right was the little kitchen nook and a galley-style kitchen. And so the kitchen and kitchen nook were kind of a U shape with a wall in between. And that wall was where the stove was and everything. And so straight ahead was a hallway down to the bedrooms and everything else. And the wife was sitting in, I don't know why I remember this, but the wife was sitting in a kind of a crushed velvet orange chair and bleeding profusely. Her face was pretty smashed in. Her hair was matted. Makeup smeared. She'd been crying, but she also had some pretty severe injuries to her face, lips and nose. Blood was coming out. And she was in bad shape. The husband didn't have any marks on his face or anything, but he did have marks on his arms, which are kind of classic defensive marks and things like that you would read about. And so we called for immediate backup at the time, and we walked in and tried to ascertain what was going on. It became very clear immediately that there had been a fight. The husband beat up the wife, and actually what he ended up doing, we found out later, was he actually fractured the bone right here on her face, and it had swelled up her eye. Her eye was swollen shut, but it had cracked the skull right there. And she had other concussions, and she had a broken nose, and her teeth had been punched through her teeth or through her lips. She was missing quite a few fingernails from trying to fend him off. They had broken off and clawed up his arms pretty good. It was for a young 21-year-old police officer, it was a pretty gruesome sight, but one that unfortunately you would get used to as time rolled on. And we separated the two. We had him in the back down the hall, and we had some other individuals came and they were interviewing her. And I was kind of a junior officer on scene at the time, and we got the order to take him into custody. And the officer that was assisting me, he didn't put up a fight or anything to take him into custody. And we're walking down the hall, and my assisting officer was in front of him, and I had him kind of by the handcuffs, and I was walking out the door, and all of a sudden I felt an impact to the back of my head, and it sounded like a big bong, and I dropped to my knees from the impact to the back of my head. And the last thing I had remembered seeing before I blacked out was my backup officer kind of supermaning over me, and I was out cold. And so what happened when I found out when I woke up is the wife, who was, in a terrible place, in a terrible spot, when she saw that we had taken him into custody and we were taking him out the door, she had pushed off the paramedics, ran into the kitchen and grabbed a cast iron pan or skillet, and she hit me in the back of the head as hard as she could with that skillet. And so that rung my bell rung my head pretty well, and knocked me out. And then my backup officer jumped over and tackled her and stopped her from hitting me anymore, and took her into custody as well. And it was one of those interesting things as a kid that you don't understand as well, like why this guy almost killed her. He almost beat her to death. And you didn't understand why somebody would do something like that. And I use that and many other personal examples and other examples that I studied. I use those to help me understand the issue of domestic violence more and what it did to people and everything else. And so all that said, domestic violence does take a lot of different forms, right? It's not just a physical thing like happened here. It's also emotional, everything else. Physically, it's hitting, slapping, choking, restraining. It's any type of physical force at all. Emotionally, it's threats and humiliation, intimidation, the ever pop culture famous word of gaslighting, insults, mind games, anything to make the abused feel like it's not abuse, to make it feel like it's their fault, to make it feel like they deserved it, whatever the case may be. Verbally, it's obviously name calling, yelling, constant criticism or demeaning language. Sexually, it's a whole different issue that we can get into another time, but there's any non-consensual sexual act or contact, or basically making them feel like it's owed or something like that. Any non-consensual. I mean, we don't want to get too deep into that right now. Financial abuse, like we said, one person controlling all the money, making them completely dependent on the other. This is a newer one that's become a much bigger deal as of late, which is digital and technological abuse. That's tracking people, tracking devices, tracking software on somebody's cell phone or whatever the case is, the constant monitoring, the hacking into passwords, the controlling phones, social media, emails, every aspect of that individual's life once again. And over the top of everything is just that overall coercion, that feeling that you are going to get in trouble if you go out of line, or if you color out of the lines, or if you do any of this. And so these behaviors is the problem. This isn't something that shows up all at once. This is something that typically takes a while to form, and it can take a while, from anywhere from a couple weeks to months to even years. And so typically what you're talking about is, these aren't things that pop up at the beginning of a relationship. But that said, I will say a victim of domestic violence is very prone to becoming a repeated victim by different people, because a lot of domestic violence abusers are predatory, and they can pick up somehow. Lots of different psychological studies and guesses as to why, but a lot of the predatory actions for a lot of these abusers, they pick up on the women or victims who are prone to be manipulated and be controlled and to be abused and everything else. And so it's important to recognize that these are all abuses, and these are all actions on tactically by the abuser. This isn't something that you can look at a victim and say, this is your fault, this is why this is happening, and everything else. Usually this is under the guise of love, of caring, of, well, if you loved me, you would do this, or if you really cared about me, you would do this, or if this. It's always an if then, right? And so that's why you have to really pay attention to what's called the cycle of abuse. And I'll go into this a lot more later, but on our podcast especially, we're going to talk all about this. But the cycle of abuse is made up of a few steps. First is the tension building phase, and this phase begins usually pretty subtly. The abuser partner becomes irritable, controlling, unpredictable, and the victim starts to feel like they're walking on eggshells and trying to keep the peace. And so signs of this include criticism, jealousy, usually lower level accusations, increased tension, the silent treatment, a lot of passive aggressive behavior, and the victim is always taking on blame and trying to fix the situation, right? So this is a lot of pressure on the victim of just to keep things mellow, don't want to make waves, just let it ride, right? And then after that phase, after that tension building phase, which is typically slated as the first step, you have an explosion, or the acute incident, right? So this is the actual abusive event. Verbal attacks, threats, intimidation. This is where something happens, like violence. And typically, if we're going back on the old textbooks from the 90s and early 2000s about domestic violence, the explosion is usually just kind of step one of many, right? So it can be just the first poke, it can be the first push, maybe the first slap. But what's interesting and important to understand about the physical explosion, the acute incidents, is it's always a downward spiral. So it gains severity and seriousness as time goes on. That's why people, if you're dealing a lot in the domestic violence realm, people will talk to you about hitting, slapping, pushing, then you go to punching, and then strangulation is always a big red flag. And the reason why strangulation is a red flag, and why it's even treated differently in criminal codes, is because it typically is the number one precursor to homicide. Strangulation is just right there on the cusp of homicide. And so as you go through the explosion, and this stage can be brief or extended, but the effect is always the same. It's a stunning, overwhelming, and frightening event that destabilizes the entire relationship. And so if things go well for the victim, this is where they pull the ripcord and they get out, right? But oftentimes, the majority of the times in these types of relationships, that's not what happens, because in comes step 3, which is the honeymoon and the reconciliation phase, right? And so that's where the abuser was going to come in and say, oh, baby, I'm so sorry, it'll never happen again. And they're showing signs of remorse. They apologize and they'll cry and promise to change. And I was just overwhelmed. There's a lot going on. I was drunk, I was high, whatever the case is. And sometimes they love bomb you at this point. They become overly affectionate, and they try to act like the perfect partner, perfect husband, wife, whatever the case may be, but they try to act like, everything is perfect, just like it was at the beginning, and hence the name honeymoon phase. Common phrases are, this is never going to happen again, and I just love you so much I couldn't help it. Or the ever famous one, like, if you didn't make me so angry, if you didn't do this and you knew it was going to upset me, and it kind of comes from there. Phase 4 is a calm phase, right? This is where things feel like they're back to this fake normal, where life stabilizes, relationship feels peaceful for a little while. There's no tension or conflict, almost like the abuse never happened, right? But underneath it, nothing has changed. And the abuser, the controller, the manipulator, the predator is just essentially resetting the stage, because eventually that tension starts to build again, and the cycle all over again replays itself. Now, as we're going to talk about later, one of the things that we really do need to cover later is how to break free, how to develop safety plans, how to take care of yourself and your loved ones and everything else. And frequently in divorce and custody cases, the controlling partner will use the kids to try to manipulate. They'll use money kids, and extended family. They'll use whatever they can. And so you have to be able to figure out how to break that control. You have to take that control out of their hands. And honestly, that can be very tough sometimes. So we're going to cover that later. But at the very beginning, if you're in this situation, if you find yourself there, you need to check in with friends, family. You need to do everything you can to get out of that cycle. And it's hard because you're going to feel like you can't. You're going to feel like you have nowhere to go. You have nothing to do. But there are plenty of options that you have. And on our website, www.carplawfirm.com, we actually have a whole list of things that you can go to, and it's all free. We have free counseling, you have counseling groups, you have shelters, you have everything else possible, and you have a lot of law firms all around the state of Texas and all around the country, candidly, including us, that we take on pro bono domestic violence cases. Now, before everybody gets super excited about that, you have to understand that any law firm that does pro bono stuff, most of us aren't getting any funding for this, right? So we're not getting like grants or anything. And so we have to be pretty careful and particular about who we help. And so because it can get overwhelming very quickly. And so reach out, find out those people the victims advocates and other people who can help, and have all those doorways and everything else to help you guys out. But mainly, really, at the end of the day, nobody should be made to feel like they are not human. Nobody should lose their liberties. Nobody should be made to feel like they're not allowed to live their life. That might look like a lot of different things to a lot of people, but at the end of the day, walking on eggshells or getting beaten and abused and everything else is no way to live a life. It's no way to survive. Life does move on. Life can get better. And that's just one of those things that we as a community and we as a country and we as a people really, believe it or not, do stand behind. I don't care about the politics. I don't care about anything else behind anybody. But if most people see that somebody is in need of help and they're hurting, most people are going to reach out a hand to help. And so if you guys need any help or you need anything else, please feel free to reach out to my office. Please feel free to reach out to your local shelters and domestic violence groups and everything else. Please do not let yourself be a victim. And that's the most important thing I'm going to say today is at the end of everything, there's only one person that can change your life. The military and law enforcement, there's a saying that you get taught quite a bit, and it says, no one is coming to save you, expect self-rescue. And so only one person is responsible for your salvation. Only one person can save your life, and that's you. You have to take the first step, whatever it may be. I'm a big guy, right? Like, I've been in law enforcement and military for almost 30 years of my life. So I can probably force a lot of things and I can do a lot of things, but that's not going to do anybody any good. If I try to force somebody to change their mind, 99 times out of 100, that change never becomes permanent. This is something that you have to decide to do yourself. You have to decide enough is enough. You have to decide that your safety, your well-being, your mental safety, and your physical safety, you have to decide that it is worth it to move on and get to a better place in your life. That's hard, but I just want to let you know that people are there to help you. We are there to help you, and nobody deserves to live that way. And so anything we can do to help, we try to be there for people, and so do a lot of the other institutions. So do the other hotlines and counseling groups and everything else. So please, you're not alone. You can always get help. Thank you very much for your time today, and we will carry on soon. Thank you.